Vehicle ballistic labs have become very popular again in training, and we're starting to see a lot of guys try to interpret data and misread information that they get off of shooting at vehicles. Now, traditionally, we've always said that vehicles are horrible pieces of cover. And the reason behind that is that there's too much uncertainty behind what happens when a round hits a vehicle. We have no way of specifically saying this is what's going to happen. Now, what's happening a lot in the training industry is guys are finding data that is irrelevant or insignificant, and they're placing too much significance on it to try to find new meaning or try to find new points of protection. And this is dangerous. This is very dangerous. And from an intellectual standpoint, it's also just lazy because we're seeing that guys are not being told how to process information and data. They're just being told to regurgitate something because it's new. So with regards to vehicles, let's go ahead and just call them terrain. Unless a vehicle is actually moving, it is just a piece of terrain. With regards to vehicles, we've always said that the engine blocks and the wheel assemblies are the best parts of real estate that afford ballistic protection. Now, why do we say the engine block and the wheel assemblies? Well, it's because they offer the biggest part of real estate, but also because of the amount of density that's offered. So with an engine block here, I've got the real estate on the side here that I can use, and I've also got all of this density capable of stopping a bullet. Similarly, down here with the wheel assemblies and the brake discs, there's a lot more material there that you can get small behind, but more importantly, there's a lot more density within the vehicle. Other components within the vehicle may stop a bullet, they may not. There's a lot of different consideration that goes into manufacturing these vehicles with regards to structural integrity. So bullets will do different things with the impact. But regardless of what one bullet does, what 2 bullets do, what 5 bullets do, we want to think about this with mindset. We want to think about what actually happens in the real world. So a single data point from a single bullet is not significant. We want to look at see what happens when multiple bullets interact with a vehicle in a ballistic lab, similar to what happens in the real world. What we're going to do now is we're going to shoot at different portions of the vehicle so we can show that we have no degree of certainty what's going to take place. What we want to keep prefaced at the front of our minds with regards to this is 3 specific things. So minimizing our signature, getting mobile, and whether or not we can return fire or pull security. The importance behind these variables is that in the beginning stages of a complex attack or an ambush, you're going to be pulling one of those 3 levers to figure out what is going to be the best decision for you to make with regards to manipulating your terrain and staying in the fight. What we'll do now is we'll skip around off of the hood here into this dummy, and what we're going to see is that bullets interact differently with vehicles. They might stop, they might deflect. But the purpose of this is not to say that we should offset our cover. It's saying that we should interpret data as we see it. So if we recognize that we are in an attack, we should minimize our silhouette, possibly get mobile, or possibly return fire. One of those 3 things. All right, let's go ahead and shoot it. All right, Andy's dead. Let's go check this out on the hood. So what we can see is we just had a standard 9mm ball round, came in here, deflected off of the top of the hood. So what we were saying about in the cover and concealment chapter, we're talking about rounds coming in and deflecting off of the top of a vehicle and creating an argument for whether or not you should be offset. This argument should be less about offsetting your vehicle because, again, you want to maximize the ballistic protection that you do have, and it should be more about keying you into the mindset that's necessary. Where that dummy was standing is a very similar position that a lot of law enforcement officers find themselves in when they do traffic stops. They maximize the use of protection that they have inside the wedge, they try to use the B-pillar if necessary, and then they get behind the door. Offsetting from that position might not make sense, so we want to adjust ourselves so that we have the mindset to minimize our profile, see if we can return fire, or if we need to get moving instead. What we're going to do now is we're going to start shooting at the pillars of the vehicle, and the purpose of this is to go into some of the newer arguments that are not very well thought out. This is where guys are taking single data points and trying to find new information that is not significant, and it is very dangerous because it's not reflective of what happens in the real world. So we've talked about how the engine blocks and the wheel assemblies are the better pieces of ballistic protection on this vehicle because of the amount of real estate they possess and the amount of density that they afford you so that you can actually have some kind of degree of protection from incoming fire. What we're starting to see with new ballistic labs that have different information is that guys are starting to take data points that may be significant by themselves, but are not significant when you translate what actually happens into the real world. So what we're seeing is guys are taking these pillars here and they're shooting at them, and they're seeing that they might stop 1, 2, or 3 bullets if you purposefully aim at the pillar and not the target. And what they're interpreting that as is, hey, this might actually be a new piece of ballistic protection on the vehicle. Now, obviously in a fight, you're gonna use what you got, but we wanna go with the knowns here. We know that an engine block or a wheel assembly is gonna give you much more real estate and much more density, therefore more certainty with regards to stopping a bullet than a tiny 3-inch piece of metal here that may or may not stop a round. So what we're gonna do right now is we're gonna shoot at the pillar, and we'll show the argument and where guys get kind of misled with regards to what is actually considered ballistic protection on a vehicle. So we took slow aim fire shots here at the door to look at the validity of the argument of whether or not these pillars are covered. So I had to purposefully not aim at the target and instead go for this 2-inch piece of metal right here on the door. And let's go ahead and see what happened. So of the shots fired, we can see that we've got one round that penetrated inward. It actually deviated and stopped. We had another round that deviated upwards, and we had another round that went all the way straight through. So again, this is an issue with regards to how guys are being taught to interpret data with regards to what happens in the real world. It's not significant to say that if you purposefully don't aim at the target and you try to aim at this portion of the vehicle instead, that this constitutes cover, because it's not. Now we're going to shoot at other portions of this vehicle to look at how current ballistic labs are being conducted and how they're being improperly interpreted with regards to what happens on the real world. We're going to go ahead and shoot at these B pillars here, and we'll see the significance behind whether or not they afford ballistic protection that allows them to be considered cover, or if it's just another piece on the vehicle that may or may not stop a bullet, but does not provide enough certainty similar to what we have with the engine blocks and the wheel assemblies. So we've shot the A pillars here, and we've seen how guys might misinterpret data with regards to whether or not they could be considered cover. So we saw that if a person purposefully tries not to hit the target and instead aims for this 2-inch strip of metal right here, there might be some degree of protection. And that information is being misinterpreted because it's not reflective of what happens in the real world. What we're going to do now is we're going to shoot at the B pillars here and approach another argument that's being taught to guys with regards to what they can use as protection on a vehicle. Now, the B pillar actually has some pretty significant structural integrity with regards to its ability to absorb force. Because this car is designed to absorb force upon impact, there are certain parts of it that will respond a lot better to force than other parts. This B pillar is actually pretty strong, but it's not significant enough to be considered cover because, again, its relative size to our own bodies is not that big with regards to the real estate it provides for ballistic protection. So what we're going to do now is we're going to shoot this B pillar, and we're going to show where more data is misinterpreted with regards to ballistic labs. So we've backed off to a distance of about 15 yards, and what we're going to do right now is I'm going to purposefully only aim at the B pillar. I'm not going to aim at the target that is exposed to both the left, to the right, and above the top of the car. I'm going to purposefully aim at that small piece of metal, and we'll see how that data is misinterpreted. So what we can see with the pillar right now is we had a little bit of penetration with the glass that broke, but the biggest issue of using this pillar as cover, instead of recognizing that it may or may not have ballistic protection characteristics, is because it is easily defeated when we apply what happens in the real world. So if I am aiming at a target that is trying to offset my ability to aim by using stacked pillars as cover, it is easily defeated by doing this simple move right here. A slight sidestep or even just a slight pivot of my torso completely defeats that argument, and now these pillars are no longer in line. I have more target to work with, And the argument that you can stack these pillars to afford cover just goes completely out the window because I move 3 or 4 inches to the left or the right and I'm able to track my sights onto new pieces of the target. The other thing we want to think about too is if we're going up against the unskilled marksman, if we're going up against the person that's not employing any kind of marksmanship skills, what naturally happens when you shoot your gun is it'll rise up and to the right. The recoil will naturally take it up and to the right. So if I'm aiming at a target and instead of aiming at the exposed portions of flesh, I'm purposefully aiming at the pillar, what's going to happen is if I employ no recoil management, no muzzle control, I'm going to naturally have my sights go over to an exposed piece of flesh, and I'm going to hit my target not because I did anything right, but because I did everything wrong. Let's go ahead and take a closer look at this B pillar. So taking a closer look here at the B pillar, we can see that there are some rounds that were stopped, but there's some rounds that penetrated all the way through. So this does not give us any degree of certainty that this can be used as cover. There are certain characteristics of ballistic protection, but then comparing them against the engine block or the wheel assemblies, there's not enough density behind this pillar to go ahead and objectively say this can be used as cover. The other issue that we saw is it is easily defeated by slightly moving your sights to the left or the right. I'm not the biggest guy. I'd like to believe I'm strong, but I recognize that just 3 inches of material is not enough to constitute cover. If this is something that is the only thing you have to work with, you're going to use it at the initial phases of a fight, but you have better real estate to move to at the front and the rear end of the vehicle. We've seen what happens when we shoot 1, 2, 3, 4, or even 5 rounds at a single point on the vehicle and how we can interpret that data. But again, the significance is not behind what happens at one point on the vehicle. We want to try to model these vehicle labs as close to the real world as possible. What we're going to do now is we're going to engage this vehicle with what would happen in the real world. Myself and Danny have carbines, and we've got 2 magazines each. That's very similar to a lot of the complex attacks we're seeing of recent, where guys are rolling out with high capacity magazines and with assault rifles like this. All right, let's go and see what that looks like. All right, stand by.
Contact right!
Clear.
Clear.
So we can see that in the real world, bullets come in not by 1s and 2s and at a single data point on the vehicle. They come in by the magazine and they come in very violently. Now in this particular type of setting, this particular type of attack, this ambush right here, you can see that there was very few good places to go on that vehicle downrange. That's why we need to use the ballistic protection that's going to afford us the most actual cover. Not perceived cover, because we did something at a flat range experiment where we shot 1 round and we tried to find significance where there was none. But what we know is actually going to work in the real world because of density and relative real estate with regards to ballistic protection. So we want to go ahead and look at the wheel assemblies and the engine blocks because they're the best places to go on this piece of terrain when it's not moving.